Ulis tore her shirt in front of her friends. She broke his nose on his neck. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Jacques Prévert High School courtyard as Leah Dubois adjusted her oversized sweater for the third time in 10 minutes. Her small frame seemed to disappear into the fabric, and her dark brown hair fell like a curtain around her angular face, creating a barrier between her and the world. Students avoided her as water flows around a stone, their voices creating a constant H that she had learned to ignore since arriving from Brittany at the beginning of the year. Leah tightened the worn straps of her backpack as she headed for the main building, eyes fixed on the ground. She had perfected the art of invisibility, or so she thought, moving through the halls like a ghost. Her grandmother's voice resonated in her mind, speaking with the melodious cadence of her native Breton. Like the oak, my child, bend, but do not break. The wisdom seemed futile now, especially when she spotted the familiar gathering of rugby team jackets near the J. Meeting? Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, came the voice that had haunted her nights for weeks. Kevin Lemire stood there with his usual gang, his perfectly styled blonde hair catching the fluorescent lights. At 6 feet tall with broad shoulders gained from years of rugby, he commanded attention wherever he went. His clear blue eyes held a cruel glint that Leah had learned to recognize as the harbinger of another day of torment. Behind him stood his constant companions. Maxime Garnier, whose red hair and freckled face might have seemed friendly on someone else, but whose sneer had become as familiar as his name, and Theo Moreau, with his dark skin and athletic build, who seemed to find genuine amusement in the daily ritual of humiliation. They were the untouchable elite of Jacques Prévert High School, their status protected by championship trophies and family connections that extended deep into the town's social fabric. "Hey, Skeleton," Kevin called, using the nickname that had stuck after someone noticed how slightly prominent her collarbones were in her thin frame. "Did you eat anything today? Or are you still surviving on air and sad?" The small crowd that had gathered laughed, and Leah felt the familiar burning of shame spread across her cheeks. She quickened her pace, hoping to pass them, but Maxime moved sideways, blocking her path with disconcerting ease. "Where are you going so fast?" Maxime's voice had a false amiability that knotted Leah's stomach. "We're just trying to be nice, maybe offer you a sandwich or something." "I'm fine," Leah murmured, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the hallway. She tried to go around him, but Theo moved to block her other side, trapping her in a semicircle of malevolent smiles. "Fine," Kevin repeated, his voice rising with feigned surprise. "Look at you. You're practically transparent. I bet I could lift you with one hand." He reached out as if to demonstrate, and Leah sharply recoiled, hitting the lockers behind her. The metallic clatter echoed in the hallway, and other students began to gather, sensing the familiar spectacle. Madame Dubois, the math teacher, passed by, her heels clicking on the linoleum, but her eyes remained fixed straight ahead. Like most teachers, she had mastered the art of selective blindness when it came to the social hierarchies that governed student life. "Please," Leah managed to say, her voice louder now, but still trembling. "I just want to go to class. I just want to go to class." "Tia," Theo mimicked in a high-pitched voice, prompting another wave of laughter from the growing crowd. "What class? Advanced disappearance?" Leah's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to remain still. Her grandmother's training had taught her that true strength came from discipline, from knowing when to fight and when to yield. But more than that, she understood the delicate balance of her situation. One false move, one moment of losing control, and everything would change in ways she couldn't foresee. The harassment continued as always, with calculated cruelty designed to humiliate without crossing lines that would invite administrative intervention. They knocked her books from her hands, trampled her papers, and maintained a constant stream of comments about her appearance, her family, and her presumed inadequacies. Through it all, Leah remained silent, picking up her scattered belongings and moving through her day like a ship weather, meeting a storm. At lunchtime, she had taken refuge in her usual sanctuary, the farthest corner of the library where the reference books created a natural barrier between her and the rest of the world. The librarian, Monsieur Martin, was one of the few adults who seemed to notice her existence, occasionally offering a kind word, or a book recommendation. Today, however, even his gentle presence couldn't alleviate the weight that had settled in her chest. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages from her best friend back in Brest. Each notification reminded her of the life she had left behind. The photos showed familiar, lofty, NG faces she no longer shared, living experiences she could only observe from afar. The isolation felt complete, a perfect storm of geographical displacement and social exile. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted her reverie. Leia looked up and saw a girl with warm brown eyes and curly red hair, pulled into a messy bun. She recognized her from advanced chemistry class, but had never spoken to her directly. "My name is Camille Riviere. Do you mind if I sit here?" Leia nodded, surprised by the request. Camille settled into the chair opposite her, pulling out her own lunch with casual confidence. "I saw what happened this morning," Camille said softly, unwrapping a sandwich. "Those guys are really jerks. I'm sorry you have to put up with that." The kindness in her voice almost broke Leia's carefully constructed defenses. "It's nothing I can't handle," she replied, though the words rang hollow, even as she spoke them. "No one should have to put up with that," Camille said, firmly. "Have you thought about talking to someone? A teacher, or maybe the principal?" Lady shook her head. "It wouldn't do any good. They're careful not to do anything that would really get them in trouble, and their families," she trailed off, unwilling to voice the futility. F's? He felt. Camille studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're stronger than you think. Sometimes, the quietest people are the ones who surprise everyone." As the days passed, Camille's friendship became a lifeline. They sat together in chemistry class, studied in the library, and little by little, Leia began to feel less invisible. Camille had a way of getting her to talk, asking her about her life in Brittany, her interests, her dreams. For the first time since she arrived at Jacques Prévert, Leia felt like she might actually belong somewhere. But Kevin and his friends also noticed the change. They began to target Camille as well, making rude comments about her appearance and wondering why she would hang out with the skeleton. Camille handled it with more grace than Leia thought possible, deflecting their insults with quick wit and refusing to be intimidated. "You know," Kevin said one afternoon as he passed Camille and Leia in the hallway, "I didn't think anyone could find someone desperate enough to hang out with bones like that. I guess I was wrong. Maybe they're made for each other," Maxime added with a nasty grin. "The scarecrow and the what?" Camille interrupted, stepping forward, chin raised. "Go on, finish your sentence, I dare you." The challenge hung in the air like a taut wire. Kevin's eyes narrowed, visibly unaccustomed to being confronted so directly. "Watch it, Riviere. You don't want to make things worse for yourself, do you?" Camille's voice remained steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "You're going to what exactly? Push me around like you do her? Real brave to pick on people who won't fight back." The crowd that had gathered sensed the shift in dynamic. This wasn't the usual, one-sided bullying they were used to. This was something different, something that crackled with potential consequences. Kevin stepped closer, his size advantage obvious. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "Actually," Camille said, without backing down, "I think I have a pretty good idea. You're a coward who needs an audience to feel powerful. Without your little fan club, you're just a other insecure kid who peaked in high school." The words hit home. Kevin's face turned red, and for a moment it seemed he might actually do something that would cross the line into territory the school couldn't ignore. But then Theo put a hand on his shoulder, and the moment passed. "We'll see about that," Kevin finally said, his voice low and menacing. "You two?" That evening, Leia found herself pacing her room, replaying the confrontation over and over. Camille's courage had been inspiring, but it had also escalated things in a way that felt dangerous. Her phone vibrated with a text from Camille. "Don't worry about today, they're just talk." But Leia knew better. She had seen the look in Kevin's eyes, the way his jaw had tightened when Camille called him a coward. It wasn't over. On the contrary, it was just beginning. She walked to her closet and pushed aside the hanging clothes, revealing a collection of trophies and certificates hidden behind them. Youth Olympic Taekwondo Championship, black belt certification, tournament victories spanning 5 years of diligent training. Her grandmother's legacy lived in her achievements, in the discipline and strength that had been forged through countless hours of practice. Her phone rang, and her grandmother's voice filled the room with its familiar warmth. "Little flower, you sound troubled. Tell me what weighs on your heart." Leah found herself recounting the whole story. From the daily humiliations, to Camille's friendship, to the escalating tension. Her grandmother listened without interruption, as she always did, letting the words flow until they were exhausted. "And you haven't told anyone about your training," her grandmother finally said. It wasn't a question. "You taught me that true strength is shown by restraint," Leigh replied, "that the greatest victory is one that requires no battle. Yes, my child, but I also taught you that there comes a time when restraint becomes complicity. When silence allows cruelty, the oak bends, but it does not break. And when the storm passes, it straightens." The conversation continued late into the night, exploring the delicate balance between peace and justice, between turning the other cheek and standing up for what is right. By the time they hung up, Leah felt something shift inside her, a quiet resolve that had been building for weeks, finally crystallizing into purpose. The next morning brought an unusual warmth to the school grounds. Students had shed their heavy jackets, and the energy felt different, more volatile somehow. Leah immediately noticed the change. The way conversations seemed more intense, glances more meaningful. News of yesterday's confrontation had spread, and the whole school seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. She found Camille at their usual spot in the library, but something was wrong. Her friend's usual easy smile was strained, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested a sleepless night. "Is everything okay?" Leah asked, settling into the chair beside her. Camille hesitated, then pulled out her phone. The screen displayed a series of messages, each more vicious than the last. Anonymous accounts had bombarded her social media with cruel comments, altered photos, and threats. The bullying had followed her home, invaded her private space, and turned her digital life into a battlefield. "They're really going after you," Leah said softly, scrolling through the messages. Her hands trembled slightly as she read words designed to hurt, to isolate, to destroy. "I can handle it," Camille said, but her voice lacked conviction. I didn't expect them to be so vicious or so coordinated." As if summoned by their conversation, Kevin and his friends appeared at the library entrance. They couldn't enter without risking Monsieur Martin's intervention, but they didn't need to. Their presence was message enough, a reminder that there was no true sanctuary, no place their influence couldn't reach. Kevin met Leah's gaze and smiled, the expression cold and calculating. He mouthed something that might have been soon or boom. The exact word didn't matter. The meaning was clear enough. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anticipation. Teachers noticed the agitation, the way students seemed to cluster together, whispering with unusual intensity. But as always, they remained willfully oblivious to the undercurrents that shaped their students' lives. It was during lunch break that everything finally erupted. Leah and Camille had found a quiet spot behind the gym, away from the main crowd. They were sharing a bag of chips and talking about weekend plans when the laughter started. "Look what we have here," Kevin's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade. The dynamic duo, hiding out, as always. They approached with theatrical arrogance, their movements coordinated, like a pack of predators. Trailing behind them was a larger group of students, dense, drawn by the promise of a spectacle. Someone had already started recording on their phone. "We thought you should know," Maxime said, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "that we've been thinking about your little speech yesterday, Riviere. Really inspiring stuff. Especially the part where you called us cowards," Theo added in a falsely casual tone. "That really got to us, made us want to prove you wrong." Camille stood, chin raised in defiance. "I'm not afraid of you." "Maybe you should be," Kevin said, stepping closer. "See, the thing is, we can't have that kind of disrespect. Bad for your reputation, you know." The circle of students tightened, and Leah felt the familiar sensation of being trapped, of having no way out. But this time it was different. This time Camille was by her side, and the protective instinct that had been building for weeks suddenly ignited into something stronger. "Leave us alone," Leah said, her voice firmer than she felt. "We haven't done anything to you." Kevin sneered. a sound devoid of humor. "Haven't done anything to us? And your little girlfriend here called me a coward in front of half the school. That's not something I can let slide." "She was right," Leia said, the word surprising everyone, including H. herself. "You're all cowards." The silence that followed was complete, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the rustling of wind in the trees. Kevin's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple. "What did you just say?" "I said, you're a coward," Leia repeated. "You pick on people who won't fight back because you're too afraid to face someone who might actually challenge you. You're pathetic." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Around them, the crowd pressed in, phones raised, capturing every moment of what was clearly going to be a defining confrontation. Kevin's calm finally broke. "You want to see pathetic? I'll show you pathetic." He lunged forward, his hands grabbing Leia's sweater. The fabric tore with a loud ripping sound, exposing her slender shoulders and teeth, a modest tank top underneath. The crowd gasped, and someone laughed, but Leia barely heard them. Something fundamental shifted inside her, like a dam breaking or a cage door opening. The months of humiliation, the daily erosion of her dignity, the sight of Camille's tears, all crystallized into a single moment of perfect clarity. Kevin was still smiling, holding the torn fabric like a trophy, when Leia's fist met his nose. The sound was crisp and wet, like a breaking branch, and blood immediately began to stream. His head snapped back and he stumbled, shock replacing the cruel amusement in his eyes. "Oh my God," someone breathed, and the crowd erupted into chaos. But Leia wasn't finished. Years of training had taught her to see openings, to recognize when an opponent was vulnerable. As Kevin tried to regain his balance, she swept his legs, sending him crashing to the ground. The movement was fluid, economical, beautiful in its precision. Maxime rushed forward, likely intending to help his friend, but Leia turned to face him. Her stance was different now, balanced, centered, radiating a quiet confidence that made him hesitate. Don't do that," she said simply, and something in her voice made him stop. Theo took a step back, his bravado evaporating as he understood what he had just witnessed. This wasn't the scared, silent girl they had bullied. This was someone else entirely. Someone who moved with deadly grace and spoke with unwavering authority. Kevin got to his feet, blood dripping from his nose, and looked up at Leia with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You broke my nose?" "I could have broken a lot more," Leia replied calmly, "but I chose not to. Remember that." She knelt beside him, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "You want to know what pathetic looks like? It's lying on the ground, bleeding because you picked on someone you thought was weak. You've spent so much time making others feel small that you've forgotten how to be anything else." She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked around the circle of stunned faces. "Anyone else want to try something?" The silence stretched, broken only by heavens. Kevin's labored breathing and the distant sound of footsteps as teachers finally began to react to the commotion. But Leia wasn't finished. She turned to the crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "I'm tired of being scared," she said. "I'm tired of good people getting hurt because the rest of us are too afraid to do something. It ends now." Camille stepped forward, her face beaming with admiration, and something that might have been love. "Lee, I should have done this weeks ago," Lee said, taking Camille's hand. "I should have stood up for myself, for you, for everyone else they've hurt. I'm sorry it took me so long." As the teachers arrived and began to restore as statements were taken and consequences discussed, the entire dynamic of Jacques Prévert High School shifted. The untouchable elite had been touched and found wanting. The scared girl had been revealed as a warrior, and the warrior had shown mercy. In the weeks that followed, the changes were subtle but profound. Kevin returned to school with a splint on his nose and a significantly reduced entourage. His friends, having witnessed the swift and decisive nature of his defeat, began to distance themselves from the casual cruelty that had defined their group. Camille and Leah's friendship deepened into something more, their shared experience forging a bond that transcended the usual boundaries of high school relationships. They were seen together constantly, two people who had found in each other the courage to be authentically themselves. But perhaps the most significant change occurred within Leah herself. The girl who had once tried to disappear now walked with a quiet confidence, her head held high, her voice clear and strong. She had learned that true strength wasn't about having the power to hurt others. It was about having the courage to protect what mattered, even when it meant revealing parts of herself that she had kept hidden. The story of that day spread through the school like wildfire, growing and changing with each retelling, but the core message remained constant. Sometimes the quietest people are the ones who surprise everyone. Sometimes the person you think is the weakest is actually the strongest of all. And sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, you find that you were never really alone in the first place.